Good day, me mateys. Welcome to the captain's ship. Captain's lodging. Meet my bird, Perry. My bird and Perry will be reading to you a story today. It is a poem by the British author, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It takes place on the swashbuckling seas. How shall I do this? As a pirate, I always act like a tough man. But for this video, I want to let my theatrical side come out. I've been working on an impression. I'll explain the impression later. Let's get into our tale. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge in 7 parts. Mr. Coleridge begins his poem with an epigraph. A quotation from an obscure British theologian named Thomas Burnet. His epigraph reads, I readily believe that there are more invisible than visible natures in the universe, and here's where I will begin my impression. I've been working on this impression of somebody who lives in the future, so he's a lot less masculine than now. My impression will be of a man with a somewhat effeminate voice, and since it's in the future, musket technology will advance. Perhaps they'll have fireplaces that are made of electricity instead of the wood-burning stove you see here. In this future, the men may speak a little bit more like women and a little bit more advanced technologically. Say like an effeminate robot. So here is my impression. Back to the epigraph with my impression voice. Coleridge writes, or Burnet writes, I readily believe that there are more invisible than visible natures in the universe. Forgive me if every once in a while I slip back to my my natural pirate voice. But continuing in my future feminine robotic voice. I readily believe that there are more invisible than visible natures in the universe. But who will explain to us the family of these beings, and the ranks and relations and distinguishing features and functions of each? What do they do? What places do they inhabit? The human mind has always sought the knowledge of these things, but never attained it. So it's interesting here in the epigraph is he starts out with, I readily believe that there are more invisible than visible natures in the universe. We've seen this with the Romantics already, that they believe in something that exists outside the world that we can connect to with our 5 senses, that there's something more to the world. So most likely Coleridge is quoting this obscure theologian. Is there a date on here from when he was writing? 1692, and this is written in 1798, or published in 1798. So he's quoting this guy, or citing this, as an introduction to explore these invisible natures in the universe. And then the quotation goes into who will explain to us the family of these beings, what exactly are they? Interesting. Burnet also asks, what place do they inhabit? What do they do? And claims the human mind has always sought knowledge of the invisible workings of the world. I'll continue on here. Meanwhile, I do not deny that it is helpful sometimes to contemplate in the mind, as on the tablet, the image of greater and better world, lest the intellect, habituated to the petty things of daily life, narrow itself and sink wholly into trivial thoughts. So, in the introduction here, Burnet says that the contemplation of these invisible forces, the invisible forces that cause the physical world to exist, even though they are invisible and they're hard to deal with our rational 5 senses, that it is good to consider these. And he claims it's good so that we don't narrow ourselves and sink wholly into trivial thoughts, or that we're only focused on day-to-day life, the mundane, the things that, or even the things that we can prove with science or through the scientific method, or rationally discuss. That there is something more to the world than this, and it's good to think about the ideas that exist in the world more than this. The epigraph continues, but at the same time we must be watchful for the truth and keep a sense of proportion. So this is what I really like about this. You have these two different views of reality. You have the intellectual world, the world that we can discuss, we can map out with math and science. Yes, this is important. In the sentence before, Burdett said that, or he called it, if we only narrow our view into the world of, what does he say, daily life, we'll narrow ourselves into trivial thoughts. But, he says on the other hand, if you're always thinking about the opposite, like the invisible natures, the meaning behind things, what is actually out there, is there a larger force out there causing our physical world to exist, that if we constantly think about those, we'll get lost. So he says in here, we must also be watchful for the truth and keep a sense of proportion, so that we may distinguish the certain from the uncertain and the night for the day. So you have the same idea that we had when we read William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, that you need both sides. The contemplation of the fantastic, the magical, the supernatural. Does that stuff exist? It definitely impacts our daily life as we encounter people, or as we use in our daily life, like words like inspiration. We're constantly motivated by ideas, but it's very, very hard to explain where ideas come from. There's an argument that we've talked about all year that ideas, or some believe that ideas are a byproduct of our brains. So our survival instincts evolve these brains which help us survive and problem solve, but a byproduct is our consciousness, and we've created all these stories about why we're here, supernatural beings that are involved with this physical world that we can see. And you have the other side claiming that everything that exists comes from these like supernatural beings or these larger transcendent somethings, and they cause the physical world to be. So in his preface to the poem, Coleridge gives this quotation, or this epigraph from Thomas Burdett, that's saying, similar to how Blake argued in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, that it's good to contemplate both sides and not get too lost in our obsession with the fantastic or the supernatural, and he says, so that we may not, so that we may be able to distinguish the certain from the uncertain, the night from the day. All right, and then that leads us into the start of the poem. So, as I said to you before, there are glosses to the left side of the text. They're summaries. When Coleridge first submitted this to an editor for publishing, the editor said, this is way too difficult to understand. You need to do something about that. And probably a byproduct, or this is a byproduct of Coleridge purposely using archaic language. So it's a bit fuzzy to us because we exist over 200 years after this was written. But like even the title, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Rime is spelled R-I-M. Coleridge is trying to make this purposely look older than it is, as if it's been passed down from generation to generation and come to us because it has some insight into the world that, just like we read with Ode on a Grecian Urn, each generation has passed the story along, and now we have this ancient piece of literature that has existed because it embodies some transcendent truth that's bigger than just our present generation.
Okay, so he has the glosses there that are generally a summary of the plot and what's happening, though at times they don't even refer to anything in the plot and they add extra information. I'll point those out when that happens. But I'll read over the text first, and then I'll come back to the gloss and summarize it there. So, the poem begins with, a general narrator saying, "It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three." And then you have dialogue, which is one of the three people who this ancient mariner stops. This character says, "By thy long grey beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stoppeth thou me? The bridegroom's doors are open wide, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set. Mayest hear the merry din." So, what this character is saying, well, so you start out, you have three men who appear to go, or they're going to a wedding reception. Now, and this person is related to who he says the bridegroom, who we know is the groom. You have this ancient mariner, so this old sailor guy, walks up to one of these three young men who are going to a wedding reception and grabs him, or stops him. And then the one who stopped says, "Why did you just stop me, crazy old man?" And he says the bridegroom's doors are open wide, I'm next of kin. He explains to me, "Look, I'm going to a wedding reception." We all know how fun wedding receptions are. It's not the ceremony, it's a reception. It's the part that everybody wants to go to, not the boring, like, sitting there and you look at your little pamphlet and just wait for all the things to be checked off before you can go to the big party. They're on their way to the big party. They've earned it, they've sat through this probably boring wedding reception, because, let's face it, most of them are pretty boring. They're on their way to the wedding reception, the feet is set, the character says, "Mayest hear the merry din," or, "Can't you hear that party going on? I'm about to go there. Why are you stopping me, old man?" And the third stanza goes on. The narrator says, "He holds him with his skinny hand," or this ancient mariner is holding this young man, holds him with his skinny hand, and says, right to the young man's face, "There was a ship," quoth he. And the young man replies, line 11, "Hold off, unhand me thy greybeard loon." Eftsoons, his hand dropped he. Alright, and then eftsoons, you have this, another example of purposefully archaic words. And we have a helpful footnote that says, "at once." So, the old man grabs the young man and says, "There was a ship," the ancient mariner. I'm letting my natural accent come out there. But I identify with this ancient mariner. So, back to the impression. "There was a ship," quoth the mariner. And the young man says, "Hold off, unhand me," or "Leave me alone, you crazy old man." And the old man drops his hand. The gloss says in this part, "An ancient mariner meeteth three gallants," or handsome young men, "bidden to a wedding feast, and he detaineth one." So he grabbed one and stopped him. And then the young man says, "Let go of me, you crazy old man." And the crazy old man does let go of him. But fourth stanza claims, "He holds him with his glittering eye, the wedding guest stood still, and listens like a 3 years child, the mariner hath his will." And then you have a footnote down here that's from the editors of this version that you're reading. And it's a strange footnote. I don't necessarily agree with it, which you'll see thematically later, but it says, "He has gained control of him over hypnosis," or what was called back in those days, mesmerism. But whatever it is, the ancient mariner has some sort of power over this young man, and the text says he holds him with his glittering eye, and the young man is compared to a 3 years child about to hear a story. The gloss next to it says, "The wedding guest is spellbound by the eye of the old seafaring man, and constraineth to hear his tale." Alright, and then you have the wedding guest really wants, oh yeah, he's related to the groom, so like, he's got the in with the bridesmaids, like, he can have a good time here. But, instead, this ancient mariner grabs him, says, "Let go of me, you crazy old man." The Ancient Mariner lets him go. And then in line, 18? The wedding guest is found sitting on a stone. So there's something about the mariner that he kind of casts a spell, and now, and he starts his conversation of, "There was a ship." The young man sitting on the stone. The wedding guest sat on a stone he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. And then we go into the mariner's story with line 21. So the mariner says, I'll say this in my natural voice.
The ship was cheered, the harbor clear, and merrily did we drop. Below the kirk, below the hill, below the lighthouse top.
You have a handy little footnote that says a kirk is a church steeple, or a church itself. Okay. Alright, we'll go on with the text. The sun came up upon the left, out of the sun came he. And he shone bright, and on the right went down into the sea. Which is important in the story. So, as they're sailing, does it say they're sailing south yet? I know they're sailing south. So, if the sun comes, here's how you know. Because if the sun comes up on your left, that's in the east. The right, as they're sailing, it's setting in the west. So you're oriented there, so if it's on the left, that means the east is to their left, and south is in front of them. So east to the left, west to the right, south would be in front of you, north would be out behind you. So, they are sailing south. Let's just assume they're sailing out of England, as they're all speaking in English here. And keep in mind, Coleridge is trying to set the poem as having happened at a time before even he's reading it. So if it's written in 1798, we're somewhere in the mid-1600s, which is important for what's going on in the story here, because think about what Great Britain is doing in the world. They've defeated the Spanish Armada, or they're still fighting with the Spanish Armada, but they're basically going out and they're taking lands and taking natural resources from wherever they can get them and bringing them back to England to make England stronger. So maybe they're still competing to colonize the New World with Spain. Maybe it's already happened and then they're just trying to make England stronger because inevitably they're always in a war with France and they need money. But it's safe to assume that if these guys are setting out, they're up to something, or in this with the large crews you'll see, they're up to something that by modern standards would seem a little nefarious. Alright, where are we? Line 25. The sun came up upon the left, and out of the sea came he. And he shone bright, and on the right went down into the sea. And back to the gloss. The mariner tells how the ship sailed southward with a good wind and fair weather, till it reached the line. Alright, so I know it's sailing south because it says in the gloss. And the line here is going to be the equator. Okay, I'm going to stop right here because this is important with equator. A lot of the action mentioned in the story has to do with being between two different places. So you're going to see the repetition of this motif where somebody's in between two places. The fancy word is liminality, which I'll put on your study sheets. But Coleridge does make mentions of the equator, or this like between two worlds places, which you're going to see unfold as, you're going to see be played with as the plot unfolds. But basically now, these guys are on a sailing ship, and they're sailing from England down south. So they're in the Atlantic Ocean. Higher and higher every day, till over the mast at noon. So if it's straight up over the mast at noon, that means they've reached the equator. And then you get the general story. Okay, so that's the Ancient Mariner telling the story. And then in line, what line is that? 31, you have the general narrator telling the story here about the wedding guest. The wedding guest here beat his breast, for he heard the loud bassoon. I mean, that's a rocking instrument right there. Like, you can still see his struggle, like, oh my god, I want to go to this great party and do all the fun things you do at a wedding. especially if it's a wedding where you know everybody and you're part of the family. But you can tell he's torn that he wants to go to this celebration, but at the same time, there's something keeping him here about the mariner and the mariner's story. The next stanza continues, which looks like it's about line 32. The bride hath paced into the hall, red as rose is she. Nodding their heads before her goes the merry minstrelsy. Minstrelsy. These archaic words I have a hard time with too. Alright, and the gloss says, the wedding guest heareth the bridal music, but the mariner continueth his tale. And then the poem picks back up at line 37. The wedding guest, he beat his breast, he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on the ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. Okay, and then this is the mariner's story, which I'm going to use my natural voice for the first paragraph, or the first stanza. And now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong, and he struck with his overtaking wings, and chased us south along. And according to the gloss, the ship was driven by a storm towards the South Pole. Okay, so they're in the Atlantic Ocean. They have North America and South America on their right. They have Africa and Europe on their left. So I guess Africa because they're at the equator now. But when they reach the equator, this storm comes up. The text never says exactly why the storm comes up, but it might have to do with something that's on their errand. You can make that argument, but it's a bit of a stretch in the text if you're going to make that. But I might just choose to make that argument later. Okay, so this ship is being driven south along the Atlantic Ocean. With sloping masts and dipping prow, the masts are sloping as they drip down, and the prow, the front of the pirate ship, is dipping down into the ocean, so you have big waves. I mean, this is chaotic right now. With sloping masts and dipping prow, as who pursued with yell and blow, still treads the shadow of his foe, and forward bends his head, the ship drove fast, loud roared the blast, and southward, aye, we fled from the storm. Sounds like the ship's running away from the storm, so you have a personification of inanimate objects, or a storm and the ship appears to be running away from the storm. And now there came both mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold. An ice high mast came floating by, as green as emerald. Alright, so they're blown way down south, and now there's a bunch of Titanic killing glaciers out there, or like, yeah, the killers of the Titanic. And they're pretty though. They're green as emerald, so you have these magically green glaciers. Or maybe not magically, I've never been to South America. To the Antarctic. Alright, where do we got here? Okay, so, but they're in a bunch of Titanic killers, so this is getting a little dangerous. And through the drifts, the snowy cliffs, which I'm assuming are the glaciers, did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken. The ice was all between. Alright, so there's nothing but these big glaciers, and there's ice everywhere, and it seems like they don't want to be here because they were pushed by the storm. And the gloss says, the land of ice and of fearful sounds where no living thing was to be seen. Dun, dun, dun. Back to the poem. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. Swound? And the footnote says swoon, which you probably need another footnote for. It could be like a storm. 61, 62, 63. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul, we hailed it in God's name. Alright, so you have an albatross getting here. They're down in the Antarctic, there's glaciers all around them. It sounds like they're kind of scared, there's no people, there's nothing here, everything's silent except the cracking of these giant ice, of these giant glaciers, and icebergs, and then a bird appears, and an albatross gets up to a 10-foot wingspan, so we're looking longer than these two bookcases here. This giant bird appears. And then everybody's excited, because, I mean, I would be really excited to see a giant bird fly, especially when there's nothing around there. According to the gloss, it says, "Till a great seabird called the albatross came through the snow fog and was received with great joy and hospitality." Alright, so they're excited. Everybody's excited to see this. And the poem continues, line 66, 67. "It ate the food it never had eat, and round it flew. The ice did split with a thunder fit. The helmsman steered us through." So you find out here that they were actually trapped between all these glaciers. And when the albatross came, a hole or a canyon opens up between the icebergs and the glaciers, and the helmsman or the steerer of the ship steers the ship out. So everybody's probably pretty excited and thinks this albatross is like a bird of omen. Yeah, you like that? You like little birds? Continuing on line 71. "And a good south wind sprung up behind, the albatross did follow. And every day, for food or play, came the mariners, hello." Okay, for food or play, and I skipped over something here. In line 66, the mariner says that the albatross ate the food it never had eat. So, it seems like the sailors are feeding the albatross and being like, "Oh my god, this bird's awesome." And as they get this seemingly pet bird, they start feeding him. The glaciers open up, and according to the gloss, "And lo, the albatross proveth a bird of good omen, and followeth the ship as it returned northward through the fog and ice." Alright, so something happened while they were trapped down here. They're going back northward. You're going to find out later that they are not going back to the Atlantic Ocean. So they've gone down around South America. I believe this is the Cape of Good Hope, or it's Cape Horn, but I believe this one's the Cape of Good Hope. So there is no Panama Canal at this time, so if you're going to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, you have to go all the way down around South America. So, it's not clear whether they mean to do this, or whether this is just happening on their voyage, exactly where they mean to go. But now they've left England, they've gone down around South America, and now they're heading back up into the Pacific, and they have this albatross following them. And everybody seems to really like him. The gloss says he is a bird of good omen, and every day he came for food or play. So they're like playing with their albatross. I mean, I want an albatross as a pet too. And they're feeding him little treats. Alright, back to the poem. So this is the mariner's story. Line 75. "In Mr. Cloud on Master Shroud, it," being the albatross, "perched for Vespers 9. Vesper is an archaic word for evenings. "It perched for Vespers 9, so for 9 nights, it perched on the mast." Oh, so it's like riding along with the ship. That's pretty awesome. "Whilst all the night, through fog smoke white, glimmered the white moonshine." Alright, so you have good imagery throughout the whole poem here. And then that's the end of the Ancient Mariner saying that, so I'm going to say it in my normal voice. I'll read that stanza again in my normal voice. "In Mr. Cloud on Master Shroud it perched for Vespers 9, while all the night through fog smoke white glimmered the white moonshine." And then the wedding guest chimes in here. "God save thee, ancient mariner, from fiends that plague thee thus. Why lookest thou so?" Alright, so he interrupts, so the young man who's sitting on the stone interrupts the narrator's story at this point after the narrator says, the albatross was up on the mast for 9 nights, or it was flying around and then it slept on the mast for 9 nights. And then, for some reason, the young man interrupts him and says, "God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why lookest thou so?" Like, "Oh my god, you look like you just saw a ghost. Like, what's wrong with you?" And then the ancient mariner finishes the story, though it's not in quotation marks right here. But the mariner answers a question and says, "With my crossbow I shot the albatross." And the gloss claims, "The ancient mariner inhospitably killeth the pious bird of good omen." And that ends part 1. Now you may be asking yourself, and you should ask yourself, why would an ancient mariner shoot the bird that brought so much luck to everybody? I know you're thinking it, Perry. You guys can probably barely see. The text will never, ever, ever explain that. What's happening here is there probably is no good reason. I remember being probably about 10 years old, and me and my sister were waiting for my dad to stop talking to his friend. He was picking us up from school, and we were playing like out in the field, and you know, little kids throwing rocks. And I remember picking up a rock, and my little sister being like probably 30 yards away from me out in the fields. And I didn't think, but I remember picking up the rock and just throwing it. And probably when my hand was here with the rock, I thought, maybe I shouldn't be throwing this. But I was like, she's so far away, it will never hit her. And then I watched the rock sailing, and it was as if it was a magnet, and its twin was my sister's forehead. And just watching the rock hit her head, and then her falling, and then running and being like, oh God, what did I do, what did I do? And then her uncovering with her hand and seeing some blood and being like, oh God, I'm in trouble. And then my dad ran over and was like, what the hell's wrong with you, what happened? And my sister was like, he hit me with a rock. And I remember thinking, oh God, oh God. And my dad just kept saying, why did you do that? And I kept thinking, I don't know. I think that's similar to what the Ancient Mariner had going with the albatross at this point. He had a crossbow, there's a giant bird. People are dumb for the most part. Okay, and that brings part 1 to a close. I will follow up in 2 days with part 2. I hope you enjoyed your first part of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Perry, did you enjoy it?